On behalf of the Stryker Area Heritage Council, I'd like to spend a short time with you to give you a brief course on my favorite railroad, the T&I Railway. My trolley interest was started as a first and second grader, where the T&I ran alongside the grade school at Wauseon, where I attended. The interurban railroads existed primarily for 40 years, between 1895 and 1935. The T&I abandoned late in October 1939 and was the next to last surviving interurban in Ohio at that time. The interurbans were born during the horse and buggy era. There were no interstate highways. Common speed on the interurbans was 50 to 60 miles an hour on the open road. At this time, gravel roads ruled the highways. Autos went 20 or so miles an hour on these roads. After World War I, more all-weather roads and blacktop macadam were constructed, and the public began their love affair with the automobile. The 1929 Depression meant few people had money to travel the interurbans. Fulton and Williams County had two very successful interurbans, the T&I and the T&W. With the drastic drop in ridership during 1929 and 30, the management of the T&I searched for a bailout. In 1932, the T&I constructed a quarter-mile interchange track with the Wabash Railroad at Wauseon and became a bridge route between East Chicago oil refineries and East Coast markets. For 7 years, the T&I had more freight business, mainly gasoline and railroad tank cars, than it had the previous 30 years. The T&I had strong ownership, City Service Corporation, and the power portion of the T&I, the Lakeshore Power, was always a moneymaker. The Lakeshore Power became the Lakeshore Division of the Toledo Edison. This is taken the first day of operation down at Dorr and Richards, where Channel 13 is now, and this was car number 1. The original shipment of cars was 1, 2, and 3. Number 2 was a combination car which could carry small parcels, and 1 and 3 were regular coaches. And this is that was February of 1903. This is a short time later there at Delta on Main Street at the Presbyterian Church at the west end of town. Here's number 1 again at the Four Corners, where the bank is at this time. This is at the time when the railroad only went as far as Wauseon, which was the first couple of years of operation. Here again, we're back at Dorr and Richards, and it's February, the first week of February, when the railroad first started. They had planned on starting in October and November, but Carnegie Steel, there was so much interurban construction that it was impossible. The steel companies could not supply the rail in an orderly fashion, and so it took another 3-4 months to get the track constructed and the overhead made. That's why it started in February. Here we have the car 2, which was a combination car, and after we received 3 combination cars later on at the 1905 extension to Bryan, then they removed the large door, and this became a regular coach. This is a rare picture. There's only 2 pictures I know of that are of this after the change in the car construction. Here's the other picture, and this again is after a short time after they removed the large baggage door at the front. Here we have car 3, which was the 3rd car of the John Stevenson Car Company in New Jersey, and this is taken looking at Doc Murbaugh's office behind the streetcar, and that pudgy boy on the drawbar there is Orrin Taylor, who is a member of the Journalistic Hall of Fame for Ohio. And that drawbar is there because there's no overhead wire yet, and you can just see a little bit of the bumper of the steam locomotive's tender on the right side there, and it's being towed, and those are all stockholders that wanted to see where their money was going. This was a Sunday morning, and Tip Taylor had just left Sunday school. Here is car 3, and originally the identifications was all above the window sills and above the windows. Now they put the name at the center of the boards below the window sills. Here we have an unfortunate accident during the first year or so of operation just to the east of Delta, and this team of horses didn't stop when they should have, but it did derail car 4. Here is the original car 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 were made by the John Stevenson Car Company. This car here, believe it or not, there was so much less than carload business, which now corresponds to the Bryan truck line, that they boarded up the windows, and this became a express car. Notice on this car that the toilet window is on the left side, where 1, 2, and 3 had the toilet windows on the right side. Here we have number 5 and its toilet window, and the vent is up there under the clerestory windows. This is a picture taken, I think, in 1903 or 4, and that was the way you got to Morenci. You went not straight to Morenci as the crow flies. You had to go to Toledo and then back to Morenci unless you wanted to get stuck in a mud hole. This is called DW Tower. On the going to your right is the Wabash Railroad. Going to the left is the T&I. Off to the right is the double-track Lakeshore or New York Central. This is one of the only pictures we have of car 6 in its original configuration with the bed spring cow catcher and the shortly after the 1905 opening all the way to Bryan. This is High Street in Bryan. Here we're at the Stryker car barns. That's the large Y leading into the car barns. And this is probably World War I time, because I think I have another picture that you'll see some soldiers. Here we are at the Bryan Library. This is the original Archibald Station just behind the current City Hall. The ladies standing in the background there lived in that first house and gave me this picture. Here's car 8, and this 6, 8, and 10 were built by the Jewett Car Company at Newark, Ohio. And notice the flower on the each end. It was rather fancy, but it still had the bed spring cow catcher. This is it taken at Delta. Here's the same car taken downtown Toledo, and you notice there's a shortage of automobiles. This was horse and buggy time. Here is the only picture known of car 10. It got hit by a CH&D flyer coming along on the Toledo terminal, and here's another view of that. Now, the steam locomotive came out worse than the streetcar. It's laying on its side there. Here's car 15. 15, 20, and 25 were the combination cars. That front door there would hold a large parcel. That's taken at the Y at Stryker. This is taken right outside Delta's, that's the Delta station, and essentially it exists just as you see there, even at this late time. Dr. Bishop, I believe, was the doctor's name, and his office was just to the east of the T&I station, and that's his car there. This is the only underpass on the T&I. It's just east a couple miles from Bryan, and it went under the road and under the Lakeshore or New York Central. That's car 15. Here is the only known picture of car 20 taken on turning around on the Y at Bryan. And you notice that large box that was going to be loaded up into the car 20. Here's car 25, and that's the old City Hall at Archibald. And down in the distance there you can see a cornfield not very far from Defiance Street, which is the main north-south street. Here's car 16, and this is at Peeville or Pettysville, and in the background you can see the Lakeshore Railroad station on the New York Central, and then in the background here, that block building is the rotary converter station, which for 11 miles each way would send juice, direct current, 600 volts to the streetcar. And they're loading up some freight. Here's Pettysville Station. And that little girl on the left became the manager of the Lakeshore Division of the Edison and the Lakeshore Power Company. That was his wife when she was in younger time. And then his mother-in-law standing there. And that's the entryway to the passenger portion of Pettysville Station. In the background is the freight part of the station. This is Bryan before the new station was built, and this is some doctor's office, but this is the Y goes in heading south on High Street, and it's a winter scene. That's car 16. Now this is, Glenn Weiler gave me this picture, and he was a motorman for many years, and this is 1917, and there's your World War I soldiers ready to head over to France. Here is original car 4, and the reason we know it's car 4 is you can see way at the far end is the vent to the toilet, and only 4 and 5, and 5 was smashed up, so that's 4, and there was such heavy use and they couldn't get delivery of an express car, so they just boarded this up and put a door on each side, and they were very, very busy in the early years because there were very few truck lines because of the roads were gravel and mud. Here is the car 2. This is locomotive 200 with a small freight train. This lasted only a matter of months, and it got cut in half when it down at Vulcan, where it crossed both the Toledo terminal and the New York Central going to Sylvania, and it got cut in half very shortly after it was delivered. This is a typical 40-foot box car right at the time the car barn there was constructed in 1905. Now the T&I had 2 cars that were parlor cars. This is the most famous of it. It went all the way several trips to Columbus, Toledo Beach, and you name it, Detroit. And this was a very fancy car, and it was reconstructed from car 1. And it was only run about 5 months in the nice weather, and then they put it away till the next spring. Here's the inside. It had drapes and chandeliers and wicker seats. And so it wasn't constructed to hold dozens and dozens of people. It was just a status symbol for the railroad. Here again at the car barns is during the 1905 and 1906 season is when they ran the parlor cars. This is D Tower, Wasion, and on your left is the T&I, complete with a lower quadrant semaphore there, and on the right was the New York Central. Directly ahead, the DT&I would go from your left to your right on the center of the picture. This is Stryker in the early years. They're ready to pick up some freight there. That's the Stryker station there on the right. This is car 53, and it was the longest of the freight cars by far. This is car 100. Car 100 was the original line car. Then car 75 became the line car about 1915. Notice there's a shortage of hair on all the people that worked. I don't know whether this is due to electrolysis or what, but this was a homemade car made right at the Delta car barns in 1903, before the 1905 extension to Bryan. Here we're coming, this is coming in or going out of Bryan, and that's Beaver Creek, the bridge over Beaver Creek. This is Mr. Daly on the left. He had the Wells Fargo wagon in Bryan, and he also stopped at the T&I station for drop-offs and pickups. But there you can see the diamond of the Wells Fargo Express Company on that, and that was the way it was in horse and buggy days. And then a little later, here's another express wagon. Notice those tires are not balloon, and that is again is car 53 there with the Wells Fargo emblem right on it, and there is the Williams County Courthouse in the background. Here we have Swanton. That's the station on the far right, and at the back end of this siding was a coal yard, but the trolley pushed the locomotive. These are wood-framed, outside braced coal cars, and they pushed so far they run off the end of the track. So everybody's helping them get the cars back on the track. This is Broadway. When you're east of the main street of Swanton, it's called Broadway. It had a jog and became Dodge Street going west. Notice this was a good snow. Here we go again. Notice it's a good snow. Now that car looks like it's in the middle of the street. Actually, the track went a ways off on the south side road, and then it swerved over in the middle, mainly because it had to cross a siding when it got down there from the New York Central or Lake Shore. Here we are. That right-hand wood building became the T&I depot. But originally, this is one of the few places where they used to have trouble with freight cars. The bolsters, with the sharp turn, it gave them trouble, and sometimes they went off the track. In a very early time, during the first year or two, here's what they did. This is Swanton. This is Swanton, and it's one of the few places where actually there was such a sharp curve that regular steam railroad freight cars the drawbars were such that it made a tight fit. That's the Pythian Sisters building straight on, and that building is still there. Now, here we're looking north. Then here is a sort of a bird's eye view. Notice where that white sign is. The road curves to the north and then goes west on Dodge Street. There is our wood, what became the station. It's still in place, but this was only during the first year of operation, and they, right from the start, they wanted to be able to haul a lot of freight in railroad regular cars with drawbars made strictly for railroads. Now here, the station has been moved away and the car comes right between the buildings on Main Street. Here is a typical scene in the first 10 years of the T&I. This is Express Car 50, and like in Delta and all the towns, they just unloaded their doggone freight right up on the sidewalk, and then guys with horses and buggies would come and pick it up and take it to where they wanted. But that's the way it was back in those days. There was no problem with heavy traffic. Here we are again. Now this is Delta looking west, Main Street. Some horses and buggies, no cars, and that's the way it was. That's car 6, by the way. Here we are at Wauseon, and this is car 5. This is from a Brill magazine photograph, and it's sort of grainy, but it's very, this is in the early years. Apparently it's like November because not many leaves on the trees. Here's car 5, and this is, I have a bigger picture of this, and they're right at a switch. So they're waiting to go in this and allow another, it's called a meet, when two of them in opposite directions meet in one spot. One of them has to get in the siding. This is the biggest bridge on the T&I, and it goes over Tiffin River, commonly known as Bean Creek to the locals. And this bridge, they had to go over that while coasting across. They weren't allowed to gas it with the controller while they went across there. Here's car 50 at the end of the line. All those milk cans, that's at Bryan. And remember, Pet Milk, or Van Camp was at Bryan in the old days, was at Bryan. And so they hauled a lot of milk. Farmers would take it to the from the county road right up to the stop where the T&I would pick up the milk. This is car 51. Now this is an express car. This is in the later years. The lettering was black instead of white. That's taken at the Stryker car barns. This is a nice picture of the Wauseon station. It had 2 tracks. One, a Y, because a lot of the streetcars originated and terminated there at Wauseon. The other one, closest to your right, that was where they unloaded freight. That whole back part of the station was a freight station, and there was a lot of freight carried at that point. This is Wauseon, and at this point, this street is called Depot Street. When you got to the east of the arcade, then it was Beach Street. That is the city hall in the very center, and the streetcars went right down the street, in the street, on Depot Street. On the left, a horse and buggy delivery wagon for groceries. That building you see there, when I was a paper boy in the 40s, that had more or less degenerated into a sort of a Skid Row rooming house at that time, and then, of course, it was removed later on. But the city hall, Aunt Jemima herself came there 2 different years to cook pancakes for the whole community, and that was a big deal. The upstairs was huge in that building and would hold a lot of people for big shindigs. And right straight on, of course, is the famous arcade at Wauseon. Now at this point, the city hall was put on wheels. You can see there's wheels under there, and dolly wheels, and they moved it over so the T&I could barely squeeze by. And then to the left of the picture here, the new city hall, the brick one, was constructed. This is Beaver Creek again, and that was a sizable bridge. Here is still the old city hall and the old wood station for the T&I, and this is taken in the very early years. However, if you look way down the track, there's a railroad car there, and the fact of the matter is Archibald had one of the largest volume of pickups and setouts of any of the towns. It's amazing that there was many cars, not just coal cars, but that's where they're in the 30s. That's where Lugabills loaded all their cattle in livestock cars for eastern markets. 1917, 1918 again. This is Mr. Short that lived just west of town, and he's taken off for Camp Jackson or wherever, World War I. Here on the left is Glenn Weiler, who was on my paper route, and this again is 52 that they boarded up. Notice the Wells Fargo emblems on the sides, and this is taken at Stryker. That's Stryker, and the station is just off to our left. Now, in the early years, the pans were not out where they were in the 30s. They were just a half mile to the west of the T&I powerhouse. And up ahead, where that tank is alongside the track, that's where Bean Creek was, or Tiffin River. But here are your pans, and this is not something that every town had, very few, but pans were vital to pick up water on the fly. 6 was always known as the smoothest riding of the wood cars. There was cars that had a bad reputation and that rocked and rolled, and there were some that they tried to always get to run. Now, here is on the left Gus Stimke, and on the right, it slips my mind at the moment, but on the back of the picture, their nicknames was Hamburger and Limburger. That's the way, and the motorman in the center there always joked with me that he should be dead because he had outlived all the other guys, and it wasn't for several years, a good 3-4 years that he went to his reward. But this is going down Holland Street, and that's Stotzer's Hardware on the right. Here's the rest of that. A lot of these, I recall this very same number 75. Now that's going backwards. The bell is on the back side. You don't see it. But when that bell rang, you could hear it for a mile away. It was bronze, and it was beautiful. And that train that cut across Wasion's Main Street had 5-6 hopper cars, too. But that was Gus Stimke over there, the guy that tended the poles. This is a good view of, that's the way the track was in the center of the street. This is looking down Holland Street towards Pettysville at Archibald there. And there is Delta's City Hall on the left, that tall structure, and that lasted until I think about 1950. And the Lincoln Hotel is on the right-hand side, and believe it or not, they used to serve super deluxe meals in the kitchen there, and people used to actually get off the Lakeshore or the New York Central and walk over to the hotel and stay all night because it had that type of reputation. It was well known all over Northwest Ohio. That's one of the early cars, or the 1 or 3 car. This is the bell I was telling you about, and actually it became a source of conflict in the 50s. The railroad quit in 1939, but in the summer of 1940, if you had been a stranger, the track the overhead, everything was there just as if they were still running. They didn't tear it up until later in the summer of 1940. And the number 75 line car used to make one trip a day up and down the track just to inspect it. It's a remarkable thing. Things would not be done in that manner in this day. They're at the tail track leading up on the trestle at Stryker. Here we are. Believe it or not, this depot is one of the most preserved interurban streetcar depots in the United States. Notice the dock where they unloaded the freight, and that's the freight part, the back part. That concrete dock is still there. And if you want to take the siding off of the front of that building, you can still read Depot T&I Railroad. That's still behind there because I saw that a matter of days before they redid the front of the building. And upstairs was a Mosler walk-in safe just like at the bank. And that safe contained a lot of stuff, most of which I have in my possession now. A Toledo Edison worker on his final day of work was persuaded between him and one of the ladies in the office at Wauseon. They were curious from 1939 until about 1959 of what was in there. So he took a cutting torch, removed the hinges, and took that and got all the stuff out and gave it to the lady who gave it to me. All the stuff was in there like yesterday. It was still running. The final train sheets, which accounted for each movement that day and everything, where they put it in there and locked the safe, and no one knew the combination. Here we are at Delta Station again, and this is on the photograph part. You can see a 5. Apparently, car 1 had 3-4 different numbers. The painter who painted the numbers on the cars must have been working overtime all the time. This railroad changed their car numbers just to a fault. These guys were hard workers. There was machinists, electricians, painters, blacksmiths, armature winders, and these men earned their money. But I got a number of pictures. The gentleman on the far left was A.C. Veneer, and I got a number of pictures from A.C. before he went to his reward. They have just moved the track over to the exact center of the road in Delta. It used to be offset. That's the Lincoln Hotel on the right. Here, this is the bandstand, and there's the City Hall at Wauseon during a winter scene, I think in 1914 or 15. And they used to have band concerts in the summer 3 months at that bandstand. Here we are back at Bryan, and that's the station, that frame house there, long ago. Now here we've left Bryan, and that's the underpass way down the way there. However, this is stop 83, and a lady that lived on a farm very close there gave me this postcard. This is going under the Lakeshore or the New York Central. But what was strange was that you would expect, since they went under the railroad, that they'd have problems with rain and flooding. No such thing. This is right by the Beaver Creek, and this was high compared to the Beaver Creek area, so they never had a flooding problem. This is a beautiful picture of old Pettysville Station. Now, until probably 20 years ago, that cement block, the right-hand side of that was the rotary converter station, and that remained there until about 20 years ago. The station was removed considerably before that, but this is a beautiful winter scene. Well, even the T&I had derailments. This is over by Stryker. This is the early years, and there's your Wells Fargo emblem up there. There's Beaver Creek. So you can see how much higher the doggone streetcar is compared to the surrounding terrain there. This is a very early picture. That's a church down there around Cherry Street and Collingwood in Toledo, and that church is still there, I believe. And this is probably the oldest picture of a freight car on the T&I that I own. Now, everyone always wonders why the T&I was such a success in the early years. Now, if you had a car like that could probably make 15, 20 miles an hour, and then you had a road like this, notice they've got the team of horses pulling them out of the mud, and that's the way it was back then. There's no macadam, no blacktop, or concrete roads. So that's why going 50 or 60 on the streetcar was a heck of a lot better than getting in that mud quagmire. This is the track. There's the car barn back behind. Now here we are going under the New York Central again, and the beautiful part of this picture is, notice the scroll is a background to the car number, and then the white surrounding the destination signs, the white edges, Toledo and Bryan. And this is a very sharp picture, and the fact of the matter is, a short time after that, instead of having the painter paint a fancy scroll there, they just made a rectangle, and that was it. But this shows how the T&I was a very they some might say wasted time with a lot of niceties. In 1924 and 25, the T&I decided to make more of a profit by only having an operator rather than a conductor and a motorman. And the motorman had to collect the fees and everything. This picture was given to me by Ralph Diltz himself, and notice the Stryker Homecoming sign, which the Rube Band played many, many times. In fact, every year, with Walter Beery as our director. This is Mr. Bechtel, and he's headed to Wasion. That's Ned Bechtel, and this is at Vulcan. Vulcan Station was actually at Peckham Loop, which was the end of the T&I after 1935, when they converted, notice the two wires above the streetcar, they converted to trackless trolleys on Dorr Street, and at that time the interurban had to transfer their passengers to the trackless trolley. This is the only known picture of the 105 in operation, and that's at Stryker. It was hung up for a while with a head-on collision, and that's why not many people saw it. This is the head-on collision. 75 and 105 tangled. They didn't hit at high speed or it wouldn't have looked that good. Here we are, they've ripped off the front and they're putting a new front on the 105. That's inside the car barns. Unusual picture. ran into a gentleman from Cincinnati that had flash pictures he took. Here we are coming out of between, at Swanton, coming out of between the main street headed to Toledo. This is Pettysville, a few months after the passenger agent was laid off. In an effort to save some money, they sold the tickets at the gas station just 100 yards from there. The young man with his bike and his newspapers, in the 40s and 50s, they had what they called the Delta Auto, delivered the Toledo Blade all the way to Bryan. In the early years, the streetcar dropped until about 1940. The streetcar dropped off the papers at each station, and they were picked up in that town station and delivered around. But they didn't use gasoline trucks. They used the streetcar. And that young fella there, about 15 years before I retired, as a middle-aged man, he came into my office, and I don't know how he had heard about his picture being in my program, but anyway, that was the paper boy, and I have a sort of a bond, having delivered blades for 5 years myself by way of bicycle. These are the two, father and son. The father was the station master in Archibald, Lovejoy's, and the son was a motorman, and they had their picture taken here down at Toledo. This is taken when the downtown station was there, and right over there, that's the Toledo Blade building, which is still there. This is Gender and Wheel, which moved up to Archibald before they moved away. And this was right this corner as soon they were about to pull up to discharge their passengers. And that's the normal way that the passengers got to downtown Toledo. In the early years, until the trackless trolleys came to Dorr Street, a lot of layovers were there at Detroit and Dorr of the T&I cars if they were laid over in the evening and started the next morning. And this one here is right there at the, and furthermore, this is the very early year because there was a striping on the side of the car that did not exist after the first paint job. But you can see those little stripes along the curved side of the car. Now here we have all-weather roads. This is Holland Street in Archibald, and those brick roads were not as bad as they claim, and they lasted a heck of a lot longer than macadam roads. They're loading up for Toledo right there. This is a Sunday, and we know it's a Sunday because this is Wauseon. There's the arcade. And this, notice on the right side, there's a streetcar back there on the Y. That's Glenn Weiler's streetcar. It didn't run on Sunday, so it was parked all day Sunday on the Y, and it didn't take off then until Monday morning. But this was a Sunday, and back that tall building right in the center of the background of the streetcar was called Moynes Hotel and Restaurant, and it was up on the second floor was a hotel, but down below was a place to eat, and they had alcohol too. But that was quite a lively spot in the early many years. Here we are pushing some coal up on the Lakeshore Power Spur. Now here's typical Wauseon scene. notice the people with their suitcases there, and they're headed to Toledo. And this is Glenn Weiler's car, and he was loading the people up. And notice the gates in the background on the right of the New York Central. And some people were getting off, and you see them walking across. Here we are at headed to Bryan, and that again is Vulcan Station at Peckham Loop. Now, this is typical after being quartered in the Y there, why he would pull out and head to Toledo, but he'd pull out and then pick up his passengers, Glenn Weiler, and that's the Wauseon Station behind there. There was a lot in the 30s. There was a lot of business on the part of the T&I when they had suburban service. It wasn't a big deal in the very early years, but in the late 20s and the 30s, why they went frequently. They had a lot of special Holland-only routes. This is another right downtown Toledo at where Haggerty's bowling alley was. And this is the 125, which was involved in a serious accident that killed a number of people. And the reason we know it is the 125 is there's a 1 and a 5 showing, and there's only 2 cars had a roof-mounted headlight, the 130 and the 125. And you can see in the early years, now this is in the 20s there, notice the people getting on. It was a full house. There it is, and the Toledo Angola and Western, of course, went out as far as Silica, and all their loadings were cement. And if you want to find something heavy in a sack, pick up a sack of 100-pound sack of cement. It'll make you huff and puff. And that is we know the headlight is hanging right where the white strip is going up and down. There lay the headlight that would normally be onto the car is hanging by the electrical wire there, and they never were able to salvage that car. The T&I is going right to left in the foreground, and the car where the wood car, in the early years, cement was only shipped in paper sacks and in wood boxcars. The covered hoppers, where they have a whole hopper car of hundreds of tons of stuff, came later. This is Archibald Station, and this is car 130, and they're waiting, and the station was at the back of the city hall after they built the new city hall. Here again is suburban service. There's Glenn Weiler. He was on my paper route, and now there he's headed to Bryan, but I'd say 50% of his work time was spent shuttling between Toledo and Wauseon, but he also would go the length of the route. And there you see 130 with its roof-mounted headlight, and you notice the trackless trolley wires there. Here's Delta bound. A lot of streetcars on the T&I terminated at Delta too. Here's this car here took the place of the car 125, and this car came from Keokuk, Iowa. But those trucks are the original trucks. They couldn't ruin the trucks when they wrecked the 125. So this was only used when they were short of cars, because this thing, as I understand it, every motorman I talked to before they went to their reward mentioned how terrible a ride and bumpy it was. This was a city streetcar. City streetcars were not intended to be going 60 miles an hour out on the open road, and that was the problem with that. here we are going under the New York Central with the 135. There is Haggerty's Bowling Alley upstairs, and you'll notice it says Interurban Railroad Station on the right-hand side. And that was where you walk in there. And this was until 1935. Most of the time, the TNI terminated at this. It was like a Union station. Here is the car 75. This is the car that for 6, 8 months, 10 months after the TNI abandoned, it would go up and down every single day. Lou Avery would run it, and they would inspect and make sure that nobody had stolen anything. And like in May and June of 1940, why, you'd have swore you'd have been waiting for a streetcar. Here is where my Toledo Indiana Historical Railway ran, from this underpass to Robinette's Crossing, which was a quarter of a mile to the west there. Now, the interesting thing about this is this overpass to hold the DT&I going to Detroit from Molina had to cross the New York Central. And of course, they weren't going to be able to cross the New York Central, so they had to build a bridge over it. Now, you notice there's a crane on the far left. This bridge that was built, not this small one, but the one over the New York Central, believe it or not, was installed in a matter of hours. I know now they'd be doing it for 2 weeks, but they only had to stop traffic for a half a day. This is the way it was with the TNI. There was very little mechanization, and when you moved rail, why, you did it strong arm like that. This is a very good shot. When they removed the streetcar tracks on Dorr Street and put in those double-wired trackless trolleys, they left Peckham Loop, which used to be where the city streetcars turned around. So the loop was facing backwards, but I have another picture where I showed where they backed around. But they had to back around, otherwise they had no way to turn around. This was the TNI freight station. And if you want to see this just the way it looks there, just go to a Mud Hens game and walk 1 or 2 blocks west, and there it is. The firemen have their recreation building there, and some of I have pictures. Well, when I go to a Mud Hens game, I'd have to check it out. But basically, and you notice up there it says Toledo. It was also the Ohio Public Service Station, the Port Clinton Freight Station. Now here, this is the way it was before the Wauseon truck line and all the big truck lines. This is backing out. That express car has unloaded their stuff. There's a loading platform on the west side corresponding to what you see on the far east side. And they unloaded, and now they're backing out, and they have to have a guy there to commandeer traffic. Here is that I told you about that only took the better part of a half day to put in, so they didn't actually detour any trains. They just had them lay over. Notice the lower quadrant semaphores, which were typical, and on the left there is the T&I track. Then notice here, if you climb up on that overpass and look down, there's the T&I. This is the historical railroad. Up on the streetcar there is John Bouse from Archibald, and he was a senior lineman for the Toledo Edison, and he was my man that used climbers and went up. He had me go up one time, and that was enough for me to go up the pole. And out down below there is Elias Hartman, and he was the track supervisor on the Delta District between Maumee and Montpelier. And I had very good help, or I couldn't have run the railroad, because you have to have people that know what they're doing. Now, in 1932, when all the other railroads, the Toledo Bowling Green Southern, the Toledo Fostoria Findlay, and all the others were abandoning, the T&I, they had smart people, and here's that little quarter mile of, we're standing over by the Wabash and looking toward the T&I, and they built this interchange track. And here's what happened. Here is the first train load of railroad tank cars of gasoline. That's Mr. Warren, who was the manager of the Toledo in Indiana, and he's watching his pet project. Instead of abandoning, they went another 7 years. Here they are. They've got their 35 cars or whatever, and the fact of the matter is they never made so much money for about 5 years as they did when they had this Empire Oil contract from East Chicago. Here is a very early picture. In the early years, the New York Central ran against traffic like the English. They ran on the wrong side of the road, I call it. Going to the right is the Wabash. Going straight through is the New York Lake Shore, at that time it was called, and it's the south track is going west. And then there's the T&I off to the left. You can see the roadbed.